Welcome everyone to our July edition of our Mortgage Quality and Compliance webinar. I'm very happy that you can join us today and hope you're enjoying a wonderful summer. We do provide these webinars on a monthly basis on a wide variety of topics relative to compliance and quality assurance. And I want to start out today's webinar thanking our 2021 sponsor, the Compliance Group, for their annual sponsorship of MQAC. So I want to turn it over to Jeff Flory for a few comments from the Compliance Group.
Thank you, Sue. Little known fun fact, I'm not sure if you're all aware, but Anna Maria Allen, who's our CEO, sits CMBA board, actually started the Compliance Group 21 years ago in her garage. And we have grown to become a nationally recognized compliance consulting firm, serving clients nationwide in 3 core areas. Quality control as an outsourced solution for pre-funding, post-funding, special audit projects, that sort of thing. Servicing QC to help you proactively monitor, identify, and address servicing compliance. And broad-based compliance-related services such as audit prep, internal audit, AML, MERS, and MERS are starting to happen now, by the way, and federal and state file-based reviews. The Compliance Group is very proud to sponsor the efforts and support the efforts of the California MBA, and in particular to sponsor the Mortgage Quality and Compliance Committee this year. This committee is just one of the ways that Susan and her team are working diligently to promote advocacy amongst its members, provide quality education and information to better inform our industry, and to help us all connect and collaborate as we continually strive to improve our respective organizations. Thank you very much for tuning in today. Susan, I'll turn it back to you.
Awesome, Jeff, thank you. And Anna Maria and the Compliance Group are really a wonderful story, big success. So congratulations on your 20 years, and thank you for your support for MQAC.
Thank you.
So we'll get into today's presentation, and I'll start off with a few comments and some remarks from the California MBA, some things that we're working on. Of course, we have our next conference will be in person. It's going to be our Western Secondary Market Conference happening at the Waldorf Astoria Monarch Beach Resort in Dana Point, August 24th to the 26th. There's still time to register and have anybody in your companies participate in that conference. We are looking forward to a very strong attendance. People are excited to be back in person as well as at this gorgeous resort. So you can visit our website for information on that event. A couple other things to note. We will be returning this fall to our free networking events that we used to hold throughout the state. Of course, we discontinued those during the COVID shutdown, but we've got some members that have contacted us about wanting to start rescheduling those coming this September, October. So those are free to anybody in the industry, so you can watch for those events as they pop up. They'll be on our events webpage on our website. Also want you to know, which is not on our event page yet, but will be shortly, we are going to be starting the planning for our Legal Issues and Regulatory Compliance Conference. That will be held in San Diego, December 6th and 7th. So please mark your calendars now. I certainly hope that you can join us. It will be an in-person event. And if you're a member of the California MBA and would like to be a part of that organizational committee, contact me, Susan at cmba.com, and I'll be happy to add you to our planning committee. We'll get working on that here in the next few weeks, I'm sure. The chairs for that event will be Raymond Schneitzel with First Line Compliance and Rich Andriano with Ballard Spar. So I look forward to working with Rich and Raymond to put on a great event again this year. Let's see, with that, I think I also want to just note that we typically, if you are a regular participant on these monthly webinars, we typically have a legislative update. Right now, we are in legislative recess in California. They won't reconvene until September. So we will have, and then it will be, or until August, I'm sorry. And then they will end session in September. So we do not have a webinar in the month of August. So in the September MQAC webinar, we will have our legislative wrap up on that, but we will not have that in today's presentation. I have been very honored to work with our chair and co-chair for MQAC this year, and I'd like to turn it over to Paula Lieber, with CMG Financial, who is our MQAC co-chair, and she will be introducing today's speakers. Paula, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Susan. Today we have some great topics, cybersecurity and labor laws. I'll start first with introducing Mitch. Mitch Tanenbaum is Partner and Chief Information Security Officer at CyberCecurity, and he has an interesting background. He was on the team that built the first GPS receiver, which I could not live without my GPS, so thank you. At Texas Instruments, he led a team of over 350 support professionals who developed a wide variety of information systems from real-time mission simulation hardware to mainframe data centers. He is also the founding member of partner in a security software startup that created a new paradigm for protecting information, and this system is still being used by the US military today, and he holds 2 security patents related to that work. Now on the mortgage technology side, Mitch has been in the business for over 20 years, starting at Mercury Companies, then the Lender Live Network, where he and his team supported several of the top 5 banks in the US, along with hundreds of other banks and mortgage lenders. We look forward to hearing from you, Mitch. Go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Paula. Thanks for the introduction. Thanks everybody for attending. Work from home, for the most part, we all kind of got thrown into that for organizations that weren't virtual before. We had hoped that that was going to be a temporary situation. It doesn't look like that's going to be a temporary situation. And in fact, really a question about whether it's ever going to be like the good old days back in 2019. No telling, but I think the answer is probably not. Let's see here. Which is what I just said here. So I think, ultimately working from home, at least to some degree, is going to be a competitive requirement. We're seeing that with some of our clients that employees will go find another employer. So the question then becomes, how do you go off and make that work? I call work from home a hostile network environment, and it really is, right? You don't think of home as hostile, but from a computer standpoint, you have, if you have kids, they probably have computers, they probably have phones, they probably have tablets, they have game consoles, you have a spouse or significant other, they have their array of equipment, you have guests, you have other IoT devices like cameras and smart locks and voice assistants and stuff like that. None of those are under your company's control, but all of those interact with any other computers that are on the network. And if one of those devices gets compromised, the question then becomes, can they be used to go off and attack your business's computer? And add to that, when was the last time you patched your dishwasher, or you patched your car, or you patched your router, firewall, or Wi-Fi access point? All these devices that sit at home that your IT team, other than your car, your IT team would probably be responsible for patching. Now your employee, you're hoping your employees are patching, and the reality is they're not going to do that. It's just not going to happen. And these are part of the reasons why that environment becomes a much more dicey environment for your company computers. And add to that, you don't have a company IT department watching your home network or an expensive firewall. We see many times we're talking to folks that their employees don't have firewalls at all. They have whatever equipment their internet provider gave them. That equipment, has a password, hopefully. That password has probably never been changed since the equipment was installed. I looked at several years ago, I looked at the network device that my internet provider gave me, and I have, because I'm me, I have a firewall on the inside of that, but that hadn't been patched since 2013. And I'm sure that does not mean that there aren't any bugs in it. It just means it's never patched. So all these things make that environment a a really difficult environment to deal with. And we have an entire program. You know, I could spend hours, unfortunately, talking about, you know, recommendations and stuff, but we do have an entire program that people can talk to us if they're interested in terms of work from home security. So what I'm going to do right now is just kind of cut to the chase and give you, you know, roughly 6 or 8 points, or, you know, if you're going to do anything, you know, here are some things that I would say are really high on the priority list. So if you can avoid BYOD, bring your own device, employee-owned devices, that really improves security. Your ability to go off and control what's installed on your employee's computer and ensure it's patched. You know, if it's their computer, you know, they kind of have the say. Now we do have some mortgage company clients who go off and say, yes, you can do BYOD, but we have a whole bunch of requirements if you want to do that. And you know, if you don't want to follow those requirements, which we will enforce using technical tools, then you can't use your own device. But this, you know, for some companies, I know they use BYOD, and it's a real challenge from a security standpoint. You know, when it comes to phones, which are a great attack vector for compromising the system, you make sure they're running a supported OS. You know, so you know you don't want old iPhones and old Android phones, and that they really are patched. You know, the patching mentality, if you will, that we're in right now on phones is about where we were about 10 or 15 years ago in terms of PCs. You know, there is technology called mobile device management tools, which allow you to go off and see if a device is patched. And in fact, other tools which will allow you to go off and say, if you are not at a particular patch level, then we're not going to let you connect to our data. So that's really a biggie. And for some organizations, it's not a problem. For other organizations, it's a real challenge. So then the next thing you have is, let's go off and harden the endpoints. What does that mean? Well, that means look at things that an attacker can use and either disable them, delete them, remove them. Do not give people local administrative privileges, even though it's very tempting. It's great for the bad guys. They love it when they break into a computer and the computer has local admin permissions. You know, Microsoft has been wrestling this month with print spooler challenges, which allow people to go off and compromise a computer. You know, lots of different things. So, you know, in general, you know, you should have a checklist and follow the checklist. And the checklist likely has to be updated from time to time in terms of what you're going to do to harden the computer. And that includes things, obviously, like endpoint antivirus and extended detection and response tools, things like that. Next thing is the assumption of zero trust. Zero trust is a relatively new concept on the mass market level. What that means basically is, you know, the way computers have worked historically is, if Joe's computer is connected to the network and Joe signed on to that computer, let's say a week ago, then surely it's still Joe and we should trust him. You know, now the new zero trust paradigm says to as much as possible, we want to do this using technology. We want to do it behind the scenes so that the users are not affected by it, but we want to go off and, you know, use the Reagan era motto of trust but verify. You know, don't just assume that because this computer is connected to the network and because it's, let's say, a domain joined computer, surely it must be good. It's a real shift in paradigms and requires some real rethinking on the part of IT departments to get there. Next thing, as I said, was remove local administrative privileges. There's two reasons for that, actually. One is so that if the bad guys infect the computer, it makes it much harder for them to move laterally across the network. But the other is that it stops users from changing the configuration. For the most part, it'll stop them from installing software. It'll definitely should stop them from disabling security features. say for example, you should be enabling password protected screensavers, but some user decides that that's really inconvenient, and so if they're a local admin, they just turn that off, and you may or may not be any of the wiser. If you're using one of the mobile device management tools, you can see, but you really don't want users having admin permissions on company-owned computers. Patching is a whole, boy, we could talk about patching for a long time. So patching, and let's just start with computers, desktop computers, Windows, Mac, doesn't matter, Linux. The time between when a patch is released and when that patch is weaponized by hackers has been going down dramatically over the last, say, 5 years, to the point now where most patches are reverse engineered, and if there's something there that's easily weaponizable, weaponized within 3 days. That means that you really don't have very much time to make a decision about whether or not you're going to go install a patch. What that also means, therefore, that process needs to be fully automated, and you need to know at what point are you not going to allow a computer that you own to connect to the network if it's not patched, and force it to patch before you allow it to connect. And when it comes to servers, then what abilities. So I was talking about a minute ago the problem that Microsoft's been having this one with print spoolers. The only effective solution right now to that particular problem is to disable print spoolers, which works fine on most servers as long as it's not a print server, which is a very small number of servers inside of an organization. But what we saw is that was the attacks were going live virtually immediately as soon as that information got out. So the key message on patching is that doesn't just apply to the operating system, that applies to every single piece of software which is installed on the computer, because all of those are attack vectors, whether or not those pieces of software are being used. So if you install some piece of software 3 years ago, the company no longer uses it, but it's still there, and now the vendor has released patches over those 3 years, and some of those patches close vulnerabilities. If you haven't deployed those patches, those machines are still vulnerable, and by relation, that means the entire company's network is vulnerable. So patching is a big challenge. And then when it comes to phone, for Apple phones, it's pretty easy because Apple goes off and controls all that, and they pretty much shove that down people's throats. So yes, it may take a month to get the patch, although you can go off and force the patch to download now, and certainly with any serious vulnerability, you want to do that. But Android phones are a real challenge because of the way the ecosystem works between the Android vendor being Google, the phone manufacturer, whoever that is, LG, Samsung, or some small player, and then the phone carrier. And then a lot of these carriers, well, the phone is a year old, surely you don't expect us to patch it anymore. We want you to buy a new phone, of course. So phones are a real challenge in terms of getting patched, and if they're employee-owned phones, that makes them even more difficult. But the only solution there is you literally block those phones from accessing corporate data if they don't have whatever the corporate approved patch level is. Next thing is remote administration. 2 examples of that are Intune for Windows and JAMF for the Mac. They are not free, but they do allow remote administration. They do allow all kinds of control. You can push patches down. You can check configuration. You can set security controls. You have that. Now, obviously, those are easy for company-owned computers. We do have some clients who go off and say, if you are going to use a BYOD device, which you don't have to do, we will give you a company-owned computer. But if you're going to use a BYOD device, we will need to install, in their case, their Windows environment, Intune. And if you don't want to do that, then just use your company computer. So, the challenge is without that, you don't really have a window into what's going on that computer. So strong recommendation. Included with Intune is included with certain versions of Office 365, the higher end ones, or you can buy it separately. There are other products, lots of other products out there. The Kaseya breach that's been all in the news, they have a product called SVA. That remote administration tool was the source of the Kaseya breach. So it is important to understand the security of these remote administration tools, but overall, they absolutely come out with a positive benefit. DNS filtering, some companies do that, some companies don't. I strongly recommend that, whether you're talking about an employee-owned computer or a personally owned computer. What that does is at the operating system level, it goes off and ensures that any IP address, which means a website, an email server, SharePoint, any kind of device, that it is not malicious, and it is literally enforced. The user, there's nothing the user can do to go off and bypass that. Two flavors and two styles of DNS filtering. One flavor just eliminates malicious content. The other flavor eliminates both malicious content and also adult content. And then the two types are for free, of which there are a number, and ones that you pay money for. The ones that you pay money for are centrally manageable. That's basically what you're buying for the money, and it gives you central visibility on what's going on. I highly recommend DNS filtering, and there are a number of really good products that are free. So money is, if all you want to do is the filtering and you don't need the centralized management, money is not an object. Training, everybody does training to some degree or other, but part of that training, and I don't think that's on the next slide. Oh, it is. Okay, I won't talk about that now. I'll wait till the next slide. The user is the last line of defense, and we just had a client of ours who really was very lackadaisical about training. They did some training, but it was kind of the bare minimum that they thought they could get away with from a compliance standpoint. They wrote a $300,000 check to the wrong party, and all of a sudden they became very religious about training. My suggestion is, do not wait till you write that big check to the wrong people. Understand that the human factor is probably the most important factor in terms of keeping the bad guys out. And now with what I call California version 1, CCPA, California version 2, CPRA, now the Virginia Data Protection Act and the Colorado Data Protection Act, you now have privacy. And most of these laws have only a partial carve out for mortgage companies, but some states have a full carve out. Of those four, none of them do, of those four laws, and expect more privacy laws. So now you've got people have to understand the privacy impact of things as well. There's a challenge for them. Anti-phishing, that's where you send out spoofed emails pretending to be hackers and see who clicks on it. We have clients who are very aggressive about that, which is wonderful. They send out weekly phishing emails. They send out different phishing emails to different departments, and I strongly recommend that. There are plenty of good products out there. A couple of them are free. They're typically somewhat limited, but most of them are fairly cost effective. The ones we sell for less than 100 people, I think is about $16 or $17 a user per year. It's not really very expensive, and clearly a whole lot less than responding to dealing with a breach and potentially being sued. And if you can go reduce that attack surface significantly, which you can by doing a robust anti-phishing training, that seems to me that the payback is really good there. For those of you who are regulated by regulators that require you to have the ability to review log files, it is mandatory to have some form of security operations center and security information event management tool. New York is an example of one of the states that require that. You know, doing your own security operations center is very, very expensive. That's why we advocate for SOC as a service. It's kind of a pay-as-you-go sort of model, and you don't have to staff it. You don't have to have the expertise. You don't have to worry about what happens when the person quits and I need to replace them. That's the service provider's responsibility. And you get the price-wise, you get the benefit of the scale. They get the cost-wise the benefit of the scale. So, you know, that's something to consider. Again, not free. But again, neither is being breached. And as we see with you know, the title vendor that got hacked with ransomware on Friday, and as of yesterday night, they're still down. I haven't looked today if they're back up. But you know, the question is, you know, how much is your downtime worth? That's really the big question here. You know, are you willing to bet that somehow you're going to be lucky and all these breaches that you hear about every day are not going to happen? You know, when you have remote users, you want to be able to manage those remote endpoints, right? And a SOC as a service gives you the ability to go do that. So that's really all I have. That's like the 15-minute super condensed version of you know, key things you ought to go do. And now I'm going to turn it over to Natalie, and because there's a whole bunch of legal things to go consider. So Paula, take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Mitch. That is some very good information. IT is clearly very important at all times, and especially when you have remote employees. So yes, let's talk about Natalie. And of course, my screen had to go to sleep right when I was about to talk about you. Natalie Vance is a managing shareholder at Klinedinst and will be speaking on labor law. She is an experienced litigator representing professionals and businesses in matters relating to professional malpractice, employment, and business disputes. She has successfully litigated jury trials, bench trials, binding arbitrations, FINRA arbitrations, and appeals. She is certified as a legal specialist by the State Bar's California Board in legal malpractice law. And this year, she received the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in the Workplace certificate, where you learn the essential practices and tools designed to increase employee diversity and to create a business model that embraces equity and inclusion. And on a personal note, Natalie is a former horse trainer and author of 3 published novels. That's very cool. Natalie, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Paula. So, you know, remote work is our
I apologize, everyone. I think that Natalie might be having some technical difficulties. We're going to give, if you can give Natalie just a moment and see if we can get her reconnected, we can continue with our presentation. If you can just hold, please. We appreciate your patience.
The wonderfulness of live sessions.
For sure. I thought it was just me. I was like, did my Wi-Fi go down? Maybe we could do some common questions that you get, Mitch.
Okay. So
I have a couple of questions from Mitch, actually. That's a great idea, Paula. We can go over those. You know, this whole notion of everybody, all employers working, you know, flipping to remote on a dime, as we all did. And then, you know, we've had all this time to kind of, you know, come back up to the surface. There's still issues, I think, that we all are still struggling with to make sure that we, you know, that we can address. One thing I was, uh-oh.
she's back.
Uh-oh. Except that we've not, let's see, let's go from, sorry everyone, we're gonna need to.
No worries, that my internet went down. This is the perils of working remotely, right as it was needed.
And your IT department was right there to protect you. Oh, wait a minute, Natalie, you are the IT department.
On how the tech was working.
Natalie,
All right.
I think you might be able to continue from there. There you go. Thank you everyone for your patience, and Natalie, way to go to come back in the game.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry about that. So one of the perils from working from home is that I am dependent on my internet service provider, as are all of your employees, and we don't have the same level of internet connection that we have otherwise. But some legal issues that arise from that, Mitch mentioned the security issues, which are critical in this day and age, but you also have some legal issues that will come up as your employees work from different places, as they use different equipment, and it raises issues with respect to how you pay them, what type of vacation and sick leave benefits they may have, what your workers' comp insurance requirements may be, and what business expenses you may have to reimburse for. So we're going to talk a little bit about all of those things as we move forward, going forward. Okay. So starting with having a policy, if you do not already have a remote working policy, I highly recommend that you get one. And the reason is that you want to make very clear from your employees what the expectations are when they work remotely. And you also want to make sure that you're addressing what equipment they're allowed to use when they log into your network, where the employee is located when they're working, and what issues may arise if they don't follow the policy. For example, if an employee is working in the same county where your office is, there's probably not a significant difference in your policies from what you were already following. But if your employee were to work in another county, another city, or even another state, there are different local laws, state laws, and tax issues that can come as a result of that. So it's important that you set guidelines in terms of where your employees are allowed to work and whether they're allowed to work from other locations besides their home office. So you need to determine where your employees are working, what equipment they're using, and how that may impact your legal responsibilities as an employer. Okay, let's go to the next slide here. With respect to sick leave and minimum wage, these are things that can vary dramatically, particularly in California, depending on what locality someone is working in. If you have workers that are working within a city or county that has a local ordinance that specifies a different minimum wage or paid sick leave requirement than the state has, then you could be on the hook for greater requirements than you might otherwise have if the employee was coming into the office. So for example, in San Diego, employers are required to give workers who work within San Diego 40 hours of paid sick leave versus the 24 hours of paid sick leave that the state requires. And if you have workers in Oakland or San Francisco, you'll be looking at 40 hours if you're a small employer with 25 employees or less, or 72 hours if you are a larger employer. And there are many other counties and cities which have local ordinances that govern paid sick leave. There is a great chart that was put together that's current and up to date as of June 2021 by the California Dental Association. And I've left the information here with a link for you to go to that web page and look up the chart that has every city and county in California that has a paid sick leave ordinance and a minimum wage requirement, and indicates whether or not it's consistent with the state. So once you determine where your employees are working, you need to determine whether or not you need to change the sick leave and minimum wage benefits for those employees in different localities throughout California. The minimum wage is currently $14 an hour in California, but if you look at various local ordinance, it varies currently between $15 and $17.30 per hour, depending on what locality your employees are working in. So it matters where your employees are working. Next slide. The same is true with vacation policies. If you have workers who are working in a different state, you might want to evaluate whether you want to change vacation policies for your employees. California has very strict rules with respect to vacation, which requires employers to roll over unused vacation time up to a cap of no less than 1.5 times the total annual accrual rate. And that unused time has to be paid once an employee leaves the employment. So if you have that type of policy in California and there's unused time that carries over that's never used, it has to be paid out when that employee leaves. Other states, however, allow for vacation time to accrue and not be paid, or to be lost if it's not used within a certain time frame. And so if you have an employee working in another state, you may have the option of changing to an actually more beneficial towards the employer vacation policy, but you may not want to do that because whenever you take away a benefit, it's not good for culture or morale. And California law may still apply if the majority of your employees are in California. So things to consider, but probably not something that you would change. Next slide. Workers' compensation insurance, your employees are still your employees, whether they're working from home or whether or not they're working in your office. So you need to take into consideration whether or not your workers' compensation policy includes these secondary employment locations where your employees are working from home. You want to check with your broker to see if you need to add in the individual addresses of your employees' work from home sites. And you do need to submit claims if you have an employee who's injured on the job, even if that injury occurs in their home. And that can include not just repetitive motion injuries such as carpal tunnel, where they're sitting working on a computer, which were most likely work related, but also if they're walking from their home office to their kitchen to get a cup of coffee and they trip over their dog, that might also be covered under the workers' comp laws if it's during the workday, because there is a personal comfort exception that allows for workers' comp to cover even minor deviations from work during the workday that are seen as necessities to work, such as going to grab a cup of coffee, use the restroom, etc. So you may want to conduct some inspections of home offices to make sure that they're safe. As an employer, you still have an obligation to provide a safe workspace, even if it's in someone's home. We definitely recommend conducting ergonomic reviews of the workspace and making sure that your employees have a place they can work to avoid those repetitive injuries that are common workers' comp claims if you have somebody who's working at a desk all day. Also, driving to and from the office, which is normally not considered as part of the workday, can come within the course and scope of employment, both for workers' compensation and for payroll compensation, if the worker is driving to the office during the workday when they also were working at home. So for example, if you have an employee who starts the day working a few hours from home and then is required to come into the office for a meeting that same day, that drive in the middle of the workday from home to the office is not seen as commuting. It's seen as a drive from one work location to another work location where the worker is required to be. And when you have employers with 2 locations, the way that that works is typically where the employee reports for work in the morning is considered a commute. But if during the workday they're required to travel to another location, that travel will be considered within the course and scope of employment, both for workers' compensation. So if they have an accident, that would be something that would potentially be a work comp claim, and for payroll purposes that would have to be paid and expensed for the use of the automobile. Now, the caveat to that is that if they are not required to come into the office during the workday, but they choose to do so, then that would fall outside of compensation, both from workers' comp and payroll standpoint. One thing, when a worker is at home and not working in the office, the presumption that COVID-19, if they contract it, is a work comp claim and was contracted at work doesn't apply if they're working 100% from home. All right, next slide. Want to talk about payroll considerations, which are also something that you are going to encounter when you have people working from home. It's much more difficult to have those employees clock in and clock out and keep track of their whereabouts. But it's critical as an employer that you continue to do that. The reason being, of course, that the employer is responsible for paying for all work performed, and you want to make sure that employees are taking their breaks, including their meal breaks, and you have the obligation to maintain those records. So you need to make sure that there is a system in place for your employees to clock in, clock out, and sign time cards, just as if they were doing so in the workplace. And you may want to look into systems that monitor whether or not employees are at their computer. And while this may seem a little intrusive, it's perfectly within your rights to do so. And there's software that's available to check and see when employees are actually on their equipment and doing work versus when their computers have been dark for a significant period of time. For hourly employees, there should be a method of checking in at the beginning of the day, checking out for breaks, and checking back in and tracking that time. So that's something that's very important. Additionally, talk to your payroll providers. When you have employees in different locations, there may be different tax implications and things that you need to take a look at in terms of payroll. Some states that border each other may have reciprocity agreements, but you may have an issue where you may owe taxes or have to take state income taxes from a different state if workers have moved to a different location. And again, your remote working policy should have guidelines about when and how employees are allowed to work in other states because of the potential for conflicts in terms of payroll and legal obligations you might have. Reimbursement is another important aspect of having employees at home. There are expenses that employees may have to incur when they're working at home that they wouldn't otherwise have in the office. So there are personal equipment that they may be using out of necessity that would have to be reimbursed, such as use of a cell phone, use of a home internet connection. And those are things that are expected to be reimbursed, although you don't have to reimburse for the full amount if the employee also uses those for their personal use. So the fact that an employee may already have a cell phone or already had an internet connection does not prevent you from having to reimburse that expense. You still have to pay for a proportionate amount that would be a reasonable percentage of the expected use for work. So if someone has an unlimited cell phone plan, the case law states that you still have to pay a reasonable percentage of the cell phone bills that would reflect the amount that would be used during the workday. And so be careful about that in terms of making sure that you're reimbursing for cell phones, internet connections, and supplies to the extent those supplies are necessary. Necessary is defined as by the employee has to supply their own versus it can be supplied by the office. So if you are supplying your remote workers with laptops, keyboards, monitors, then you don't have to pay for your employees' purchase of those items. They can use the keyboards, laptops, monitors that are provided by you to do work. If they refuse those because they want some type of upgraded system or equipment, you don't have to pay for that because it's not necessary. At that point, it becomes a voluntary expense by the employee. And the same is true with respect to office supplies. If an employee purchases office supplies for their own benefit, for example, they get pens and paper because they prefer to take notes by hand, but you've offered them a computer with the ability to take notes, you don't have to pay for those office supplies just because the employee prefers to use those particular supplies versus what you have provided. So voluntary expenses don't have to be reimbursed. Make sure that you're tracking expenses, that you are getting receipts, that you are getting expense reports with attestations, and that you are aware of exactly what the employee is using in their workspace to do work. Okay. And then along the lines of reimbursement, you also want to make sure that you are being careful with potential wage issues that can arise when people are working from home. Just last week, there was a class action lawsuit filed against a large mortgage banker here in California, in the Eastern District of California, that alleged that remote workers were not being reimbursed for internet and phone service, their own personal computer usage. They're also claiming office supplies, utility bills, and the fair rental value of their home office space. So that's a new lawsuit just filed, and again, that is something to watch. Whether or not you would have to pay for fair rental of home office space depends on whether or not you require remote work versus encouraging or offering remote work. Again, a voluntary remote working environment is not going to require reimbursement, but if you're requiring it, it would. So that's something to watch. The other allegations that are being made in this litigation are similar to ones we've seen before, but expanding on it. And so I did want to talk about it briefly because it is a critical issue if you have loan originators on your payroll or anyone who's paid on a commission basis. A lot of banks and mortgage lenders pay their loan originators on commission, but in order to ensure that they're getting paid minimum wage, they have a base pay that is paid upfront, that's an hourly pay, and then thereafter they pay commissions after the base pay is earned through commissions. So there's a credit for the base pay, and then they get the additional commissions on top of that. And the problem with that practice is that there was a lawsuit in which it was found that paying a base pay and then charging back the commissions against that base pay deprives those workers of a paid rest break. Because workers are entitled to a paid rest break for every 4 hours that they work. If they're having to pay back the money that they were paid through commissions, which can only be earned through work, they're really not getting a paid rest period. And so that's problematic. And this lawsuit has not only made that claim, but has expanded it to include the fact that because commissions are their sole source of money that's being used once they've earned that base pay back, they're actually not getting paid for attending meetings or other non-sales work such as loan processing, training, or customer service duties. So based on that, they've expanded that and there's a potential liability there. So things to keep in mind in terms of potential wage issues that can apply to commissioned salespeople. And then the split time travel issue was addressed recently by the Department of Labor and it confirms that commuting during midday between offices may be something that you have to pay for if it is required versus whether or not it's voluntarily undertaken by the employee. So the key to reimbursement is whether or not you are requiring the employee to have certain technology on their own or equipment. Okay, then next is just timekeeping and tracking resources and off-the-clock wages. You want to, again, make sure that you're tracking the work of your workers. And because they're working from home, there may be a tendency to pop on the computer and do something off hours. If you have hourly employees, you have to ensure that they're not doing that. Make sure that your policies are clear that off-the-clock work is not permitted, and if it's done, that they have to clock in and out in real time in order to complete those tasks so that they can be paid appropriately. Okay. And then additionally, harassment in the workplace. You would think that when we're taking workers out of the workplace and they're not interacting with each other as often, the harassment claims would go down. But in fact, there has been a survey that shows that harassment has actually increased as people feel more emboldened by the fact that they're not face to face. It's kind of like the situation that you see on social media where you have people who are not face to face interacting, and they're more emboldened to engage in more aggressive types of conduct behind a screen. And we're finding that also to be the case. A recent survey found that tech workers have experienced more harassment based on gender, age, race, or ethnicity while working remotely. And that harassment is happening through chat, email, and video conferencing. And so, you know, working longer hours, that screen in between that emboldens people to do behaviors that they might not otherwise do, but also just the blurring of boundaries when you're working from home versus being in a office setting may cause people to be a little bit looser, a little bit more personal, more casual, and less professional with each other, which can lead to more conversations where other coworkers may feel uncomfortable, and also where other people aren't present to hear or see those conversations. People may be more emboldened to engage in inappropriate conduct. So it's critical that your employees be aware of the potential for harassment while they're working at home, that they understand your policy, that they know where to report it. And in California, all employers with 5 or more employees have to provide anti-harassment training once every 2 years. And so that can be done remotely. The DFEH actually offers a free online training on their website. It's definitely something that you can provide to your workers to make sure that they are doing. So have that training done remotely. Make sure your workers understand the policy still applies, even though they're working from home, and know how to report harassment if it occurs. So lastly, again, make sure that you are updating your handbook and your policies. If you haven't already updated your handbook, it's probably time to do so. There are a number of policies that need to be included now, including the new COVID rules, as well as the supplemental leave for any type of COVID incident. And you also have the CFRA, which applies now to employers with 5 or more employees. And so if you were previously not subject to the California Family Rights Act, which provides an unpaid leave of 12 weeks to employees who have a serious medical condition or are caring for someone with a serious medical condition or have a newly born or adopted child, then you need to update your policy to make sure that you have a written policy that includes that. And of course, I am highly recommending that you have a written remote work policy, which makes clear where your employees work, what equipment they should be using to access your office computer systems, what reimbursements are permitted and how to obtain reimbursements for business expenses, and how to check in and check out so that their hourly work is being documented, as well as verifying where the employees are working. So those are just some of the issues that we're encountering with a remote work environment. And if you have any questions, happy to take those. We have a few minutes, and if you have questions for Mitch, please chime in with those as well.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thank you so much. So many things to think about. I mean, as I started to say in our little impromptu break there, hey, it was a great example of the working remote, right? We have to rely on our internet. But was thinking that, you know, all of us as employers, I am a small employer as well. And, you know, all the things that we had to, you know, to do to prep and kind of turn on a dime for these environments, you know, it's caused a challenge. And I don't sure, you know, we still are finding things that we need to, you know, to be aware of. So I do have a couple of questions. What does Natalie, here's one. What does Natalie advise when the employer is California based and has remote workers in other states regarding the California harassment training? Give it to all employees since it's a California company, or only those employees that reside in California?
I would give it to all employees. As a California employer, you want to make sure that, one, you're following California's rules, which would certainly apply to California employees, but to the extent there's a gray area, you just want to err on the side of being conservative always. And you can't go wrong with making sure that all your employees are educated about what is appropriate in terms of harassment and what their obligations are, and understand your policy. If you were ever to have a harassment claim, the first thing a plaintiff's attorney would say is that you don't care about harassment because you only educated the people you were required to.
Got it. Yeah, better be broad, right? Just not take any chances. So, Mitch, how, from a security standpoint, how should employers handle a breach when in a remote work environment or remote work situation?
That's a great question, and especially since a lot of these ransomware style attacks happen so quickly, and they happen, at night, and on weekends and times when your IT staff isn't necessarily in the office. So first thing is you want to have an incident response policy that's required by a regulation. If you sell to small organizations like Fannie or Freddie, you're legally required to have one, and when you get a moral audit, for example, you will get asked about that, and they'll want to see it. They'll want to ask when was the last time you trained your team on it, and who are the people that are responsible for implementing it. So, and I can tell you, at least when it comes to Fannie, we have one California lender, the client of ours we're working with right now. Last year, when they did their technical review, they came back with one finding. This year, they came up with about 11. So Fannie is getting much more sensitized to this environment. But I would say the short answer to your question, Susan, is the process for dealing with an incident has to be trained, and so that every employee knows what their responsibility is. And it may be, in the case of a home worker, to unplug their computer, turn it off, and notify IT, even if that's 3 o'clock in the morning. If it's a manager, what is their responsibility? And if it's IT, what is their responsibility? That would be the short answer. But you certainly need to consider that in your incident response program.
And having all of that documented well in advance, for sure.
Yeah, and what the policy says is that you'll have a program, and the policy might be pretty short. It might be, a couple of pages, but the program might be 30, 40, 50, 60 pages as you go into all the details of the things that you need to consider. What about, incidents at cloud service providers? Everybody's using cloud service providers now. It becomes much more complicated because of that.
Right. And I don't know about everybody else, but our small organization, we seem to be getting more and more phishing emails and scam emails than we have ever gotten. And I'm going to assume it's because of the shutdown environment, but it's definitely something we all have to, stay on top of.
Yeah, statistically, we're seeing numbers like 300 to 900% increases depending on the category of spam.
It's crazy. It's just crazy. I will note there was a couple of questions about getting a copy of today's presentation. We are recording today's webinar and it'll be available on our website in like the next day or so. So if there's anyone on your teams that weren't able to join us for today's presentation, we can always, you can always send them to the recorded version of that. Mitch, Natalie, thank you so much for that valuable information. It's definitely top of mind for anybody who is an employer these days. Wanted to remind you for the next webinars, we do not have a webinar in August, but we will be returning in September. We're going to be talking about top examination findings at our California regulator, which is the Department of Financial Protection and Innovation. And I hope that you can join us on September 23rd. If you by the way, if you were forwarded today's invitation by a colleague and would like to be added to our list, you can email me at susan@cmba.com and we'll be happy to add you to our distribution list. That concludes today's webinar. Thank you both for a great presentation and I appreciate everybody joining us today. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks.